Our work roles or professional lives don't define the scale of our leadership. Instead, the scale of our leadership is about how we show up as a whole person. Welcome to Tradies Who Lead, the podcast about everyday leadership for everyday legends. I'm Ashley Baltecki, a diesel mechanic by trade and your host. Today we welcome Gavin Cribb, a seasoned automotive industry leader with over 3 decades of experience. Starting as an apprentice at Ford, Gavin quickly progressed from his hands-on role as a tradie into leadership before transitioning into training and supporting the incoming generation of apprentices. Currently an education manager with Bendigo Kangan Institute, Gavin leads a team of 70 automotive trainers and supports employers to implement national apprentice programs within their businesses. Yet, Gavin's leadership in his industry doesn't end there. As Vice President of the Victorian Automotive Forum and active in various industry committees and award initiatives, Gavin supports his industry's growth and development and all the people within it. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today, Gav.
Thank you, no problem at all.
So what is leadership to you?
It's a good question. I guess leadership in different environments probably looks a little bit different. But to me, in my opinion, leadership sort of means showing you're responsible for not your actions, but the actions of your team and team members. And that, to me, is really built on respect and rapport.
Where did your leadership journey begin? I did see, obviously, in your notes about your career pathway that you entered that formal leadership role pretty early on in your career.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, because I guess leadership, it really kicks off when you're a technician. So probably not when I was an apprentice, but definitely when I started in my qualified days. I moved up to Queensland and worked in a dealership environment there and moved into a foreman role. So I guess that's probably the most defining leadership sort of moment, I suppose. So, as you know, in that sort of position, you're liaising with customers, you're responsible for the workload, you're responsible for, all the technical work that happens within that workshop. And you're also responsible to keeping that team happy, engaged, and energized. So, if we didn't lead our teams well in a foreman environment, they wouldn't be working through smoke if they needed to. They wouldn't be doing overtime afterwards. They wouldn't be, washing a car and emptying bins with a smile. So I think, at a foreman stage, I think that was when the first sort of leadership piece sort of, started taking its calls, and I enjoy it.
It's a pretty steep learning curve, I think, because I do reflect on my exposure to industry, and there's not necessarily a lot of training or support we get when we're going to that transition of being responsible for more than just ourselves. What was those first few years like for you? Was it something that you kind of had natural strengths in that space, or did you have good mentors or role models to learn from?
Yeah, I think probably more so, probably there was some luck, I think. I fluked some bits and pieces. Generally, there's not a great deal of role models when you get to a foreman role, because you're sort of the most senior person there. So it was, a lot of it was suck it and see, So I always work pretty closely with people, and I'm always comfortable rolling my sleeves up and not too big for any job. So I think, again, getting that rapport with people was crucial, and that's sort of my general mantra anyhow. So if you can get people to trust you and believe in you, they're more likely to come on that journey along with you.
And it's obviously taken you, and that I guess approach has led you well, because you're now looking after over 70 trainers in your current role. What's one tool or strategy you use? Because obviously it's a lot harder to build that rapport with each individual in your team when you're working with that many people.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm lucky, I'm blessed that, there's a couple of us in the management role that do look after, the training staff. So then, I share that responsibility. Again, I think it's still about trust and rapport, so it's difficult to be led by someone that you don't trust or you don't have any rapport. But so it's important that, we do that. We empower our staff as much as possible as well. It's important to make mistakes, so we tell everyone we make mistakes every day, so, and we tell everyone every day is a school day. So there's always something to learn. And we all know that individuals are so unique, so you can't just have this broad brush, everyone will do it this way. You've got to know your employees, so you need to know their strengths and their weaknesses and what they're comfortable with. And, in a perfect world, you lean on that. But often, some will get work that they're not as much suited to as the person next to them. So you need to either buddy them up or show them that, you're prepared to take them on that journey. So if it means showing them that we'll, roll our sleeves up and push a broom around a workshop while they're doing something else, that's fine. So it's, but I think the building a rapport is probably one of the leading strategies anyway.
Yeah, and it's really great to hear you talk about the need to be flexible from a leadership perspective, because I do think, especially coming from that trade background where there can be this idea that there's right and wrong ways to approach jobs, that we then take that mentality to people. But that's as far from the truth when it comes to people and leadership as possible, because everyone is so unique and different and they need different things. When you build that rapport, is that something that is quite a formal arrangement in your workplace, or is that more just taking the time to make sure you have visibility with your team, you make time to talk to them and get to know them just gradually over time? How do you kind of approach that? Is it quite formal or quite casual?
Yeah, it's more of a casual sort of, I guess, organic approach, so we do try and check in. We have a process where everybody gets a check-in, so all of our staff have check-ins by their direct line managers, and that can be as formal as you want it to be, but it can be, and again, as you know, you've got to kind of choose your audience. You've got to understand, what they're comfortable talking about. So, some will be more than comfortable to get right in it and say, how do I do this better? And I'll take this, criticism or constructive criticism on the chin and go and hone their skills, and they'll get better. Whereas as many aren't like that, so some find, that sort of constructive feedback, if you like, offensive, patronizing, and so on. So, and that's not wrong either, so, because we are all complex human beings. So I think, some of those check-ins with people who may be a little more reluctant to hear that message will be, for me, what did you do on the weekend? Tell me what your weekend was like. And, and the check-in will be 99% not work. And then you get that 1% about work. And then, maybe the following week it might be 2%, and then 10, and then, so, and it'll always probably be, 70-30 about their personal life and not about work, so, because that's a different sort of individual. So, and that's a bit of a learning journey for both parties, so, but what we do tend to find is people need to be happy in themselves and in their life and have that balance, so if they don't have that, they're not going to perform at work as well. And trying to get an understanding of what is happening in their life does help you understand the pressures that they're receiving. So then you can weave your work piece in and around it. So I don't think there's any silver bullet. You need to have, I think of patience is obviously something that you need to have as a leader, and the ability to understand others that, I guess, respond differently.
It sounds like that empathy skill is also really critical for taking into account that while we might have performance management that we need to consider in a workplace environment, that it's not as straightforward as what's happening at work as all that's happening in that person's life. And being able to have that open mind really helps build that trust. And that trust isn't going to come straight away. It does take time.
It does. And we actually went to a leadership conference within our institute, I guess about 12 months ago. And so we had this amazing presenter who came through and presented around the different generations, your Gen Zs, I forget which others there are now, but there's so many that I'm losing track of. But it was really interesting that they surveyed, it was a very large survey of each of these sort of particular type of generations and what they saw as good leadership. And it was really interesting that they were very different. So if you've got someone from, a younger generation, they actually see leadership as, flexibility, empowerment, and many of those sort of strategies. Whereas someone who may be maybe mature age does like the authoritative type of structure and a very structured approach and very formal. Although, so I guess we need to recognize that there's not one, one hat doesn't fit all. We need to recognize that people need a nudge in a different way. Some will need that, a guide for the first 3 months. Some will need to check in every couple of days, but everyone is different and none of them are wrong, so, and somehow you just got to make harmony of all of that.
It's definitely interesting, and we're definitely seeing it more, and I imagine you see it in that training space as well when we're thinking about the new generation coming into the workplace and the skill shortage challenges that we have now and also historically. From your perspective, having the experience of being the tradesperson, the employer, and obviously working in the training and TAFE sector now, what do you think it is that we can be doing as individuals or as an industry to attract and retain future talent?
If I had the right answer, I reckon I'd be doing pretty well. So there's no silver bullet, so there's so many different types of learner types. There's so many different types of workshops, so there's a lot of really, really good work that employees are doing. And our industry is pretty thankless, so you only really get feedback when something's wrong, so Yeah, I think we're on our third year of record enrollments. So we're getting a lot of apprentices coming through the doors. So employers are doing some amazing things in attracting them and maintaining them. There's always been about a 50% retention rate for automotive apprenticeships, which is challenging. However, it's very similar in plumbing and carpentry and every other apprenticeship as well. Is that good or bad? I'm not sure. Is the system, so what can we do better to attract apprentices? I think a lot of people don't know about the automotive industry, and I was really shocked that I heard recently that some schools at careers days didn't know about apprenticeships or mechanical apprenticeships, and so you can't be what you can't see and all those sort of things. So I think working with the communities, I think, is really important. For a workshop or an employer base, offer work experience to your 2 or 3 closest schools. Get involved with those schools, and I think that'll do a couple of things. Obviously, it depends on what type of workshop you have, but if you're in the school and being part of a solution, you're probably going to get some customers from it anyway. So you're probably so you're going to get a little bit of that, but you might start to build that pipeline of potential students if they're coming from work experience and they have a reasonable time. If you're putting up some ads, that you're more likely to get somebody locally, and we all know that's sort of a better fit, so ads, ads in Seek, I did a bit of a study on what an automotive apprenticeship ad looks like, and it's not attractive, so, and it probably goes back to, when we've all been put into a form position or a management position of some description. You're good at something and you get promoted. We're good at fixing cars or fixing trucks, so you get promoted. You don't get the skills or the knowledge. How do I write an ad for Seek? So, people don't know. They're not doing anything wrong, but they just don't know. But, if you're putting on an apprentice, you would expect that there's going to be 4 years of training along with that. So that should be in your ad. If it's a small independent business, say that it's a family-owned business and it has been, celebrate those amazing things. If it's a franchise, celebrate that you're part of this national organization or something of that nature. I've put a whole bunch of automotive apprenticeship ads out of Seek next to an ad for Bunnings. And I tell you, if I was looking at one or the other, or if I was mum or dad, I'd be going to Bunnings. So it's just some little things. And, it'd be great if there was some templates that we could share with it, industry, but we're also a little bit time poor. So, but I think, the industry broadly can work closer with TAFEs and understand a little bit more. TAFEs can do a lot better at getting to industry, so again, everyone's so time poor that you almost have to do this in volunteer time. So, but I think just having a better understanding of one another's business is going to help create those pathways and that retention. And it is difficult, to retain an apprentice once you've got one. It could be a personality clash. It could be the type of work that the apprentice was expecting. There are so many different variables that you can't be prepared for all of them. But it is probably some transparency. Why I don't know of many employers who have a checklist of what they expect their apprentice to do in the first week, or in the first month, and then in 3 months, and then in 6 months. Maybe create something like that where all parties know what the expectations are for a little while, because the employer again has just been a really clever technician and is now become an employer, but they haven't got a lot of those skills or all those ideas. So I think if there's an area we could all share and throw some ideas around, that'd be fantastic. But I think it's that engagement and trust. So if you have an apprentice that may not be suitable to the industry, there's a lot of finger pointing. They didn't learn anything at TAFE, and then the employer didn't help them practice. And I don't think that's helpful. At the end of the day, we've all got equity in it. We can all be a little bit better, but we're only going to do that if we're engaged a lot closer. So a lot more partnerships, a lot more collaboration, I think is definitely going to help. That's for sure. But I think the first bit is getting to the schools, because really the schools are going to refer students to trades or uni. That's kind of their two options. And we all know that, the trades tend to get funneled some of the students that may not be, achieving what they hope to. And so trades to schools seem like an easy option. But, they're so technical these days, and everything's, written with software and so on. So there's a lot more to it. So if the schools understood the complexity and the excitement of the industry, maybe they'll help us get the right students as well.
You've dropped so much wisdom. That's incredible. Obviously, it's really about that collaborating from school right through the apprenticeship journey, but also each taking, I guess, accountability and responsibility for being a good role model and creating visibility of our industry and actually advocating for our industry. That's something we might do as individuals or employers, but also making sure we're investing in ourselves and potentially considering processes so that we can be better within our workplaces and create a better apprentice journey.
We don't live in this perfect world where everyone's got a little bit of extra time or can afford, to spend, additional time with apprentices and so on. So we kind of got to do what we can with what we've got. But, the industry's got to be kind to itself as well, so, it's frustrating when you hear, one workshop, suggests they're a lot better or the other workshop doesn't do things right or anything of that nature, because nobody wins out of that, so your workshop up at the road should be your biggest ally, so you should be sharing. There's so much work out there. Everyone's booked out. So I don't know why we're not sharing and collaborating more, so if I was a customer that came to a workshop and you couldn't help them for some reason, you go, but Joe just next door, he can do a great job, or she. The customer's going to be happy and everybody wins, so I think we need to have a little bit more harmony in the industry, and then we're probably going to look more attractive to potential apprentices as well.
Yeah, it is. It's a very long game and very multifaceted. I like how you talk about, obviously, that kind of, we're all a bit time poor and we often have to take some of those extracurricular activities into our own time. And you're very active in the industry, not just in your formal role. And one of those roles you have is as the Vice President of the Victorian Automotive Forum. And I was fortunate enough to attend an event with you last year and speak to your group of trainers. Can you tell me more about the Automotive Forum and your journey with it?
The forum is essentially professional development and networking for automotive teachers. So we have a committee of management and so on, and we all volunteer our time to do it. And majority of us sort of sit in management type roles. However, we make it for the teachers. We make it for the front line. We don't provide, so we limit the amount of managers that are allowed to attend. We make sure that the majority of the attendees are teachers who will actually be able to get something from it. And it sort of goes back a little bit on what we said earlier. We attract, tastes from all across the country, and everyone does a great job. We can always be better, but we give everyone the opportunity to network, to learn from one another, share our mistakes, even share recruitment strategies. So it's really to foster that great industry that we're in. So the majority of people who attend and are part of it all love the industry. They've been on the tools from when Noah was a boy and so on, and everyone's doing work in the backyarders, and we're always talking about our cars and our hobbies and tinkering and so on. And it's about maintaining that drive and that excitement, I suppose. So we run 3 conferences per year. And so essentially it's a 2-day conference, and the idea is to have some cross-pollination in automotive. This is, so we might have motorcycle guests, we might have mobile plant guests, we might have, road transport guests or EV and so on and so forth. So we try and, provide some professional development for the suite of trainers, because they do come from different automotive areas. And we've gotten to a stage where I think that you can see the passion in the room. And we're fortunate to be in a position where we have presenters that want to come and be part of it. So they want to, share what they can do. So, we've had the Bosches of the world and the Teslas and the Daimler trucks and the ACCs and Tradeswomen Australias. And, there's a list of these amazing people who are all trying to contribute and trying to help, that, give up their time and come present to all of our staff and our competing staff as well. So it's probably worth noting that, all these tastes are actually our rivals and competitors. But what we're finding is if we actually sit as a group together, we're a lot more powerful, and we have a voice as a group, as a training industry, rather than trying to beat each other up and say we're better than one another. It's about just giving that automotive training environment a voice and a stage and support, So part of what we're doing with the VAF, it's a registered non-for-profit. It's been around probably 20 years or so. We have scholarships for anyone who's in the automotive industry. So for anyone out there right now, if they're looking at, coming across to become a teacher, we offer scholarships with some cash incentives and mentoring and a place to work anywhere in Victoria. So, and that's just what we're trying to give back to the industry as well and support. So, essentially the VAF is professional development for teachers, but also a stage and a voice for those teachers as well. This year we're going off and we're doing our first national conference. So we've had, interstate interest for many, many years, but we're in July, we've got Brisbane. So we're running out of Brisbane. There'll be obviously, hopefully a large attendance base from, the Queensland TAFEs. But, and we'll be pushing national for the next few years. Again, just to sort of broaden the opportunities and those partnerships. Because if, I think the industry would probably agree, if we're all on the same page as TAFEs, everybody wins, so it's about creating that safe space and creating a PD and just being part of doing what we love, so it's the networking is probably more important than the technical, so I think it's reassuring for a lot of teachers in the industry to go to an event like this and liaise with someone who's from another provider and go, oh, you do have similar challenges when it comes to compliance or auditing or recruitment or any of those things, and how do you get around that? And 10 years ago we wouldn't share any of that information because we were fiercely competitive. Now we just hand it over. We hand over resources. We give cars to one another. We give resources when needed, and we pick up the phone, and I think at the end of the day that's going to help the apprentice and help the industry, and that's what it's really about.
That's a fantastic example of the power of collaboration and community, and obviously a group of really, really passionate people.
Yeah. And it's it's not rocket science, is it? So I think if you can get and the old adage of misery loves company, but if you've got people who are passionate, they attract other passionate people as well. So we're building a community of, in inverted commas, the right people who want to do the right thing and who want to move forward and who want to invest their time in it. So yeah, I love giving up my time to do it. It is a hobby, I guess you'd say. And it's a lot of work, but the rewards, they outstrip the effort, that's for sure.
What's your advice for tradies, whether they're apprentices or they're trainers now or they're off the tools, about how they can show up as an everyday leader?
Ooh, I think I sort of touched on it before. Yeah, every day is a school day. Never stop learning, and it's not easy showing respect and being the bigger person all the time. But sometimes you just got to suck it up, because people are looking at you. So even if you're in a small independent shop and you're the only technician in there, you're still a leader. So you're still responsible for a lot of work, and you're responsible for these huge outcomes that impact a lot of people, so if you don't have a job done at a particular time, you and I both know there's people waiting at the counter that need that, so you're leading the customer base in some way. So always, I guess, remain optimistic and professional, but be prepared to swallow your pride, I think.
That's great advice, and it really shows how, regardless what level we're at, we can show up as role models and leaders by just choosing about how we want to show up in the workplace, no matter where we're at in our careers.
100%.
Thank you so much for your time and for all the fantastic advice and knowledge you've shared today, Gav. There's definitely a lot of takeaways I've taken away from our chat today, so I know that the listeners will get a lot out of it as well.
Beautiful, absolute pleasure. So I love what you do, so keep it going, because this is the sort of thing that helps our community. So congratulations to you too, Ash.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Tradies Who Lead or follow the podcast on social media at Tradies Who Lead. Thanks for joining me for this episode. We'll be back with another exciting episode in 2 weeks.